San Diego, California, by way of where? Philadelphia or something? That's where you grew up,
yeah.
right? Sandra, when did you get into the academy? Approximately what year?
1981.
And of course you were in San Diego at that point.
Right.
What prompted you to become interested in the academy? What was the academy like at that point?
Well, California did not have a chapter. And Harry Fain, who was president of the academy the year I was admitted, and Stu Walzer, both in Los Angeles, were trying to get a chapter together. So they recruited me. Basically, I had a case with Stu, and I was on some committees with Harry. In fact, we were sort of following each other around in California with various programs with the legislature and so on that we were working on relating to family law. So I knew both of them, and as I say, I had a case against Stu. And so they recruited me to be in it. And at the time, I don't know if there were any other San Diego persons in the academy. There may have been one or two. But within a few years, we were able to form a chapter.
So you didn't have a Southern California chapter
No.
back then?
No, we didn't.
Really? But so there was just one chapter for the state of California?
No, there was no chapter for Southern California. And, I'm not sure when it was that the decision was made that we would be the only state that would have two chapters. But the northern chapter didn't include the southern chapter. So we didn't have a chapter at all.
Okay.
And we had to go through the whole process of the provisional chapter and then a regular chapter.
Oh, okay. I didn't remember that.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Our provisional chapter had Stu as the provisional chapter president, and I was the vice president in charge of programs. And for quite a lot of years after that, whoever was in charge of programs, that was sort of like our president-elect position. So I moved into the president of our chapter after Stu. He was the provisional chapter president, and then the first official chapter president, and then I was the second one.
Okay. You know, it's funny because a lot of us that have been doing these interviews, Michael Albano just got done talking, and his first mid-year meeting was at La Costa. And my first mid-year meeting was also, it was in 1976, and I didn't realize, I thought Southern California was up and running at that point.
No.
Although I do recall, I mean, we had, of course, the Harry Fains and the Stuart Walzers. That were the big names, of course, in that area, weren't they?
They were the big names, and they were almost the only names at that point.
Right.
And our chapter did not become a chapter until the 80s.
Wow.
Until like the mid-80s.
Interesting, because I wouldn't have believed it, because Connecticut had one well before that, of all things.
Now, we had fellows in the academy, but
Right.
not
Right.
enough to have a chapter.
What was the academy like when you first joined? What were your initial impressions, if you can recall, both pro and con?
Well, the very first meeting that I went to was in Hawaii, in Maui, and was then the Intercontinental. And I
Wailea.
It was in Wailea.
We saw the whales.
Yes.
And that was Eddie Schaefer, I believe, might have been the president. Was it?
It was
84?
before. It was before. Yeah, I think that's right. It was Ed Schaefer.
Yeah.
And I brought my whole family. At that point, Tori, who's grown up in the academy, was not yet 2 years old, and she played with Elizabeth Kelsey, who is also almost exactly the same age.
Yeah.
So we were very young members. There was not a lot of welcoming of new people. It was a very cliquish kind of group. But Stu Walzer and his dear friend Leonard Loeb and their spouses were very, very warm and welcoming. And they assured me that if I just kept coming, every time I would come to a meeting, I would meet more people, and I would have more people to relate to and to get to go and do things with. And I've passed those words of wisdom on throughout all the years I've been a fellow in the academy, because it was very true. I do recall at the first cocktail party I went to that Michael Albano looked me right in the eye and talked to me like he was really listening to what I had to say. And I have never forgotten that warmth, and I've tried myself, hopefully, to pass that on individually to new people as they come in. But in the very beginning, it was sort of a cliquish group. That was one impression. The other impression was that since I was only a 11 or 12-year attorney, a lot of what was going on was just a little bit a reach for me to keep up with, and it was extremely exciting. Because back in my hometown, I was lecturing, and I was, one of the somewhat better known attorneys, not necessarily the biggest attorney, but I was reasonably well known and somewhat visible, being female. But when I went to the academy meetings, the CLE was so much better and so much more challenging, and it was extremely exciting to me. I remember a meeting in Palm Springs at the Racket Club.
Where the pool was shut down by the health club
Yes.
because it was polluted. That was
Yes.
the O'Flaherty meeting.
Yes, I remember that, and I remember
Oh.
Harry Fain, my hero, standing up, and he was on the Board of Governors at the time, and making a speech, and we still were not a chapter yet. And the CLE had 4 workshops that was on valuation, and you went to a different one every day, and you were pretty much in the same group. And so I would go to the workshops, they were a little bit more intimate setting, and so there was a lot of dialogue between the fellows and the presenters. And I was just sort of blown away by the questions that were being asked and the discussion that was going on, because again, it was a little bit of a reach for me, and I was kind of galloping to keep up, and it was very exciting. I was very impressed with the Academy, and very honored to be in it.
I think that was a lot of people's impression. I think also a lot of people's impression was, it wasn't just the CLE, which was meaningful and important, but it was some of the stuff that you learned just kind of sitting around with these people who were, in my mind, somewhat legendary.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
and just picking up stuff and realizing that some of the same issues that of practice that you were having difficulty dealing with, is they didn't have any better solutions, and that in and of itself was a little bit reaffirming. And
Absolutely, absolutely. And I remember at one of these workshops, Julia Perlis was asking some questions. Now, where I was, there were hardly any women at all. When I became an attorney, there were, maybe a handful in San Diego at all, and not in family law. And so I wasn't used to having female mentors to look up to. But the Academy, despite the fact that you'll hear lots about that there weren't very many women and things like that, there were some good women. There were some really good women. And it was exciting for me to just listen to somebody like Julia talk at a meeting, in one of these workshops, and to realize that the rest of the country did have people who had been in practice longer than I and with more experience than I, and that were very smart and very, very competent.
right. There came a point in time when you started to get involved, be it committees or in leadership roles. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in my own chapter, as I mentioned, I was the second president, so I was pretty much on a committee path early on, sort of on the local basis, and I had been throughout on the local bar and the state bar in California. As far as into a more national area, I'm sorry that Art Berman left, because Art was somewhat instrumental, him and Jimmy Friedman and Sandy Dranoff, in encouraging me or mentoring me to come along and move into the Board of Governors and things like that. I was on the Board of Governors from our chapter, and then I was an elected member of the Board of Governors. And then I was Sandy Dranoff's parliamentarian and Don Fullenweider's parliamentarian. And so, as it is with affirmative action throughout the country, other than legislatively, it has been the men who have mentored and helped women move into positions occupied by the men. If they didn't move over and lend a hand, it wouldn't have happened. And so those men all were, in my opinion, looking for people they considered to be bright or having leadership qualities. I got delegated chairing different committees and things like that, and I followed through. And that, of course, is always a assist in moving up any kind of a ladder.
One of the things that I always found in the Academy is yes, of course, all organizations are somewhat political, but that the Academy, as opposed to certain other organizations, people could move up in the chain by working hard and by really doing, not just saying they were going to do something, but by doing it. And that hard work is rewarded in the Academy. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think that there's been a lot of politics in the Academy, mostly in years past, not so much now. And I think that if you didn't follow through, you would pretty much go off track. Nobody was going to continue to support somebody that wouldn't get the job done, generally speaking. But there were quite a lot of politics, and there was quite a lot of favoritism, and I think that was a negative aspect of the academy for a lot of years. I don't think it's as prevalent now. There was a lot of, and one of the things I disliked the most was the attitude that it was my year, my fiefdom. I could do what I want, and you all could do whatever you wanted. And I likened it to a cruise ship trying to go across the ocean with a new captain every year. And every time there was a new captain, you would switch course. You wouldn't necessarily go back to shore, but I don't know that you ever really got to the other shore because you were constantly going back and forth. And there was no sense of, when I get on deck and I take over the ship, we will continue on the same path that we had intended to go. And I think that also has changed, that there's been a lot more cooperation from year to year with presidents, with the president looking to the president-elect to get on board and assist with the continuation of things that took longer. Otherwise, you could never have a project that went more than 1 year.
Oh, absolutely, especially with the advent of the one-year presidency. As you remember back in when the O'Flaherty in 1984 thing that you alluded to earlier, is that was the beginning of the one-year presidency. That's a difficulty to get your programs through, but with the reasonable transitions and being able to work together with the person above you who might be respectful of your project and allow you to hit the ground running, so to speak. I was fortunate because I was under Marcia, and Marcia allowed me to do that, and so I could, at least hit the ground running, as I said, and I hope I did the same with Mike Albano. So it was important to work well as president, about to be president, with who was the present president and the future president, in order to get that, instead of, as you say, that ship maybe veering off course. That was a big help. There have been exceptions, though, because there have been some, we don't have to talk about it, we can if you like, in which there were president-elects that barely spoke to the president for a number of reasons. And that was terribly unfortunate. Certainly wasn't helpful to the academy.
Well, it was it was a big disservice to the academy, but with a one-year term, the academy survives all of those off-course projections. But there were some real difficulties. I was on a project, I was appointed by George Stern to chair Focus on Forever, a concept that he had of developing materials that would help people who were about to get married stay married forever. And it was a kind of a piggyback on a prior project, which had been our analyzing from our experience as divorce attorneys why marriages fail, and taking from that information what we could suggest that would be helpful to make them succeed. And we brought on board, I chaired that committee for about 5 years, but we brought on board expert psychologists and financial planners and people to help develop the materials. And this year we will have the finished DVD, PBS program. The manual's been finished for a number of years, and it's a fabulous, exciting project. But George and Miriam Mason, who was after him, cooperated very well together, and that project continued for those 2 years. But the next two presidents were absolutely not in favor of the project, despite the fact that the whole academy was. So although they were leading the academy, they were not in tune with what the academy wanted. And so I had to fight very, very hard to keep it from being completely taken out, removed. We got the manual finished before that could happen, and the rest of the project just had to go into limbo until I then became president and could get it sort of back up and running again and finished. And it's been taking a while to finish, but it's a very big project. So there have been a number of political misdirections, in my opinion, and attitudes that were not necessarily seeing people as implementing the will of the academy, but rather indulging their own will. But again, I think that a lot of that is very much gone, and I've seen a high level of cooperation in all the presidents since my time. I passed it on with the person who followed me, with Richard Barry, and he did with Barbara Hanshoe, and it's continued consistently throughout that time through a number of other presidents. And I think we're long past the days of that type of partisanship and, I guess, individuality of the president.
Richard came right after you. What year were you?
I was 2002, 2003.
Okay, and who did you replace?
I was after Lindsay Short.
Okay.
And he was after Charlie Shaneberg.
Okay, I see. All right. And I want you to speak more about Focus on Forever shortly. But what other projects were you really interested in that you either hit the ground running on or was a big focal point of your presidency?
Well, the presidency, there were some that I continued from before me. During my presidency, the ALI came out with their principles of family law practice, and I felt it was extremely important that the Academy weigh in as a group on these principles and study them and provide some analysis and feedback. And so I appointed what I considered a blue ribbon committee to study it, and they still have an ongoing project. They've taken sections of it and analyzed them in great depth and produced some very, very fine analyses of the various principles and are still working on them each year as time goes on. So aside from Focus on Forever, I think that's one of the more main projects that I took on. And basically, it's as you know, a pretty full-time job just to keep the meetings going and the committees going and encouraging them. And we're focused also on increasing membership. So we had started a program, I was involved in this, of going out to the various chapters or about to be chapters or groups that wanted to form a chapter and trying to encourage more membership to attend. We would have a cocktail party before the executive committee meeting. We would invite prospective members to come and introduce ourselves and try to encourage an increase in the applications to the Academy. We didn't want it to become an organization of gray-haired old attorneys. We needed some new blood. And I've always been very cognizant of the fact, as I said, I was only about a 12-year attorney or 11-year attorney. When I became a fellow, I don't know how many 11-year attorneys we admit anymore. So either they were very desperate in California, or we were looking at some potential, not necessarily having already become the top person in your area. And I'd been involved in a lot of things, and I was, a trial lawyer, but nevertheless, I was young, and I don't know that we necessarily extend the invitation to as many young people, but if we don't, I think we're going to fade.
Well, you were ancient compared to me. I got into the Connecticut, was no chapter. I was the second Connecticut fellow, having practiced for 5 years.
Wow.
And the bylaws then permitted it if you had 95% of your practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to be examined by the New York chapter at that point, which was another story. But it was a little bit maybe different back then. I think you're right. From what I'm seeing over here, there aren't that many 10. You're allowed in at 10 to at least apply after
Mm-hmm.
10, unless it's something special like my situation. I think they still have that rule. But I think the reality is you don't have that many people that are applying that are under 15 or maybe sometimes more than that.
Well, I think part of it is, I see it somewhat as, the positions of the Supreme Court justices. They kind of grow into the job and become thoughtful, generally speaking, competent people. And I think that when people become fellows in the Academy, if we continue what we had been doing all along, which is the continuing education, training them to be good trial advocates, encouraging them to be the best they can be, and providing the highest level of legal education and on our networking, I think that they will grow into being the creme de la creme if they have that potential. And recognizing the potential may be just as important as recognizing the ones that have already achieved the pinnacle status.
Tell me, we were kind of kidding about it a little bit earlier, so where was your mid-year meeting, by the way?
It was in Scottsdale.
Oh, okay. All right. And that's right. That was a few years. That was when we learned of Leonard Loeb's passing.
Right.
Put a damper on
That's
things like that.
That's right.
Where do you recall where your executive committee meetings were?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask me that.
It's
let's
okay.
see. The first
Don't worry
one
about
was in San Diego. It was at the same time as our annual Southern California Chapter Trial Advocacy Institute, and that year it was in San Diego. So our first meeting was in conjunction with that. We went to Graceland.
Oh, wow.
Being a former teeny bopper, we went there because the chapter was, I was told the chapter needed some assistance with Memphis people.
Mhm. There've been 3 there for the last 40 years.
Yeah. And we were in Portland, again for the same thing, being told that the Northwest needed some assistance in Oregon. And I don't actually remember where the 4th one was.
Well, tell me, were there any other memories that stick in your mind as far as your year as president? Highs and lows or important things that you want to share with us today?
Well, I thought it was wonderful. I had the time of my life. It was a smooth year. The meetings went extremely smoothly. I had learned a lot watching some of the dissident activity in the past, and I was on the executive committee for like 15 years, and the board for something like that. So by sitting and watching and participating, I learned an awful lot about trying to reach a consensus and getting people to yes. So I think that it was a really smooth, successful year, and that was pretty much of a goal of mine. I've enjoyed watching the Academy grow, and I think it has grown. I do think we have gotten a little bit off target with the emphasis on mediation, collaboration, and so on. I think it's important to learn those skills, but we have almost equal timeshare with alternative dispute resolution programs as we do with trial advocacy, and I think that's off target. I really think that the Academy needs to be the premier educator of trial advocates in the family law arena, and if we don't take that role, we're not really living up to our mission. It doesn't mean that we ignore teaching people negotiation skills. I think all of those are part of the arsenal of every family law attorney, but the emphasis has shifted in a way that I don't think is indicative of what the Academy stands for.
Are there any other observations you have about today's Academy? Well, you're just a few years removed from being president yourself, but any other comments or thoughts about today's Academy versus when you either started or back in the early 80s, or when you were president, both pro and con, other than what you've made reference to?
Yeah, it's hard to assess it because, I mean, we're talking about a span of 20-some years, or 20-some years, and I've changed so much since then, I'm sorry to say, from being a fairly young attorney to being a fairly old attorney. And so some of it I don't know how much is just my change in perspective. The years when I was young and it was extremely challenging and I was trying hard to keep up and so admired the people that were the older attorneys and the experienced attorneys, and now I'm older and not sure I'm giving back all of what it is I took. I hope I am, and I would like to be able to do that. But I think that one of the most rewarding things that I've done professionally has been involved in the Academy. I'm grateful for that opportunity.
Okay, is there anything else that you want to add at this point?
No, I'm
Terrific.
no.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sandra.